Hello and welcome to Spiral 1 of the MFM1P, the Grade 9 Applied course. The first series of videos will be a little bit longer because it's a bit of a Grade 7-8 review. So our first topic is numeracy skills, and what I want you to be able to demonstrate by the end of the lesson is making sure that you can add and subtract integers, substitute values into equations, do square roots, and plot points. So our first topic here is adding and subtracting integers. So if I move too quick in the video, you can always pause it and copy down what needs to be copied. So when we're adding and subtracting integers, I always tell people, remember the number line. So typically, what you'll be taught is when you add positive numbers, we're going to move to the right on the number line. However, if we subtract numbers, we're moving in the left direction. We're getting smaller. So that worked out really, really well until we introduced negative numbers to you, and then things get a little bit more tricky. So if you are adding, for example, negatives in your life, so this first one was when we're adding positives, but what happens when we add negatives? So if we add negatives, so if I add a negative to your life, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it turns out when it's adding negatives, that's a bad thing in your life. So you actually move in the opposite direction. Similarly, if I subtract negatives, so if I take bad things away from your life, what happens? Your life gets better or more positive. So we end up with being very careful in terms of our direction. So for example, if I did 3 take away -4, okay, what I'm essentially doing is I'm subtracting or taking away negatives in your life. So it turns out the answer is going to be a +7. And what happens there really is when you're subtracting a negative, it becomes a positive. If we want to look at it from balancing positives and negatives, so if this is my positive chart and my negative chart, so if I put a bunch of positives in, so let's say I put 9 positives on that side, all right, I need it to be balanced out, and then I'm going to put some negatives in. 3, 1, 2, 3, that's 6. So right there, that represents +3 because I have 3 extra positives because these positives and these negatives will cancel each other out. So that represents +3. If I were to take away, as indicated, it says to take away 4 negatives, meaning that 1, 2, 3, and 4 negatives get taken away. That means now there is only 2 negatives that need to be canceled out. So if we take those 2 negatives and those 2 positives, we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we end up with a +7. So there are a variety of ways that you can do that. So what I always tell students is we don't like those double signs. So when you're adding a positive, subtracting a positive, we want to write it as one sign. So if I'm taking away negatives from your life, it means I'm making your life better. So that is really going to be 3 + 4. If I am taking away positives in your life, so if I'm subtracting something positive that you enjoy, that means that I'm actually taking away. If I'm adding negatives to your life, so your life right now I'm going to give you bad things, that is the same as subtracting. And finally, if I'm going to add good things to your life, that essentially means we are adding. So we want to, in the grade 9 course, I want to get these 2 signs, I want to reduce them to one sign. And the reason for that is just for simplicity in working with integers. It's a lot easier if we just have to deal with single signs. We don't have to worry then which way am I supposed to be going, right or left on the number line. All right, so we come up with a general rule. So if the signs are the same, so if you have 3 take away -4, or we have 3 plus +4, those 2 signs are the same. If the signs are the same, we end up with an adding sign. So that means we would have 3 plus 4 in this particular scenario. So if the signs are the same, so if you're taking away negatives out of your life, it's adding. If you're adding positives to your life, it's also positive. If the signs are different, 3 plus negative 4 or 3 minus positive 4, in both cases, I'm either adding negatives to your life or I'm taking positives away. In either case, it's a bad thing. It ends up then in both cases to be 3 take away 4. So if the signs are different or opposite, they become one sign become a negative sign. So getting rid of the double negatives or the double signs here. All right. So right here, we have 2 signs side by side. So that means that we can rewrite this as negative 3. If I'm adding negatives to your life, that means things are getting worse. So that means it's going to be negative 3 take away 6. So again, if we start at negative 3, it says adding, so we're supposed to be going this way. However, we're adding negatives, so we're not adding when we add negatives, the negatives are actually this direction. So we're going to add negatives, so 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So that's why negative 3 take away 6 is your negative 9. In the next case, we have 4 plus, so I'm adding good things to your life, so that means that the overall sign would be plus. If we go to the number line, we're adding positives. The positives are that direction, so we're going to add those 3 positives, which gives us 7. 4 plus 3 is 7. So you can see how removing the double signs makes the actual operations a little bit easier. For this one, negative 5, I'm taking away negatives. So if I take away negatives from your life is actually getting better. So on a number line, we start at negative 5. Subtraction, we traditionally know is going that direction. But if I'm taking away negatives, that means the negatives are the numbers over here are what we're taking away. So we're actually moving in that direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we end up with positive 2. As the numbers of the expressions get more complicated, that's why being able to remove these double signs becomes that much more important. So I'm taking away negative 4, so I'm taking away negatives. That's a good thing. But I'm adding negatives, and that's a bad thing. Now we don't really need the number line because we got rid of those signs. Now we know that negative 2 plus 4 is positive 2. Subtract 6 gives us negative 4. All right, moving along then. We want to first state whether the answer will be positive or negative, and then evaluate. So now we're doing multiplication, and the same rule holds true. All right. If we have an even number of negative signs, a negative and a negative for multiplication, the result then will be a positive number. So we know it's going to be positive. And in this case, it would be positive 6. If we have an odd number, so here we have 1 negative, and that's it, because it doesn't have a partner, the result will be a negative, and we have negative 8. Same rule applies for division. We have 1 negative, so we have an odd number of negatives. That means my final answer will be a negative. 12 divided by 4 is 3. For D part, I have 2 negatives. All right, it's an even number, so 2 negatives will result in a positive. So we end up with a positive 4. When it becomes a little bit more complicated, we just got to sort out the number of negative signs that we have. So we have a positive there, and these 2 negatives have partners as well. So everything's going to be positive in the end because that 2 is a positive. So that means we will end up with a positive answer. What do we end up? 9 times 8, 72. And even when we have division involved, we can sort it out. So we have that pair of negatives will become a positive. We still have an odd number then of negative signs in this expression. So that one with the 4 doesn't have a partner, so it'll end up being negative. So we end up with 15, I believe, is what that will calculate out to. So the rule when multiplying and dividing integers is fairly straightforward. If we are multiplying two negatives together, the result is a positive. If we're multiplying two positives together, we end up with a positive. So in the case where we have same signs, it'll be a positive number. If we have a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, we end up with the opposite. And for the larger expressions like E and F, if there are an even number of negative signs, the result will be positive. All right, and your example for that are those two examples right there and there. So if we have an even number, so in this example, even number of negatives, we ended up with a positive result. Here we had an odd number, so that means we had a negative result. Sorry, even number of negatives, odd number of negatives. Okay, that's how those two rules relate together. Order of operations. Why do we need order of operations? It's because it's important in what order the numbers are applied. So I have an example here with Harvey and Larry. They have come up with two different solutions. One got an answer of 1, and the other got an answer of 7. So which of these processes was correct? Well, we use our order of operations. I'm going to skip down here, and we use BEDMAS. All right, and that's the order in which we do operations. So if we look at Harvey, inside the brackets, he did 4 take away 3 first to get his 1, and then he multiplied the 1 and 3 together. Then he added it to the -2. On the other side here we have Larry. He did the 3 times 4 first to get 12, brought down the -3. 12 take away 3 is 9, and then he ended up with 7. So who is correct? In class we'd have a discussion, but because this is a video, I'll jump right to the conclusion here. Larry is correct. And the reason for that is he followed BEDMAS. All right, so I wouldn't have talked about it in the class. We would have came to that conclusion. So now I'll just talk about what is BEDMAS for you. For a reminder here. So B, this is the order we do things in, so we simplify our brackets. That is our first task. Our next task with the E is we work on our exponents. Now D and M go together. D and M is division and multiplication. Multiplication. This is the important part, in the order they appear. All right, so it has to be in the order they appear. And similarly, the A and S are put together as well, and that is adding and subtracting in the order they appear. So if we look up above and we look at what happened, both students did the right thing. They started with the brackets, so they did follow BEDMAS for the first part. But here we can see Harvey did his subtracting first, and Larry did his multiplication first. So he followed BEDMAS because in BEDMAS they started with the brackets. There was no exponents. Larry knew he's supposed to, inside the brackets, do any division and multiplication, and that's what he did first. Then he went on to doing the adding and subtracting. So Harvey actually got his BEDMAS out of order. All right, so it's very, very important, and you'll see that with examples in the next video.